رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. ربنا افتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق وأنت خير الفاتحين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, and welcome to the sixth lesson of the Tuhfatul-Atfal course, Gateway to Tajweed. In this course, we've gone over our entry-level topics of Tajweed and learning how to recite the Quran the way it was recited by our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, we've gone through quite a big portion of Tuhfatul-Atfal, the poem written by Sheikh Sulaiman al-Jamzuri, rahmahullah. And today, inshallah, I hope that we can cover the last three chapters. So this lesson might go a little bit over time. So be patient with me. If you do need to go somewhere at 9:30, feel free to excuse yourself. Don't worry, you don't need to ask me. You can go, but inshallah, I think that we can cover everything in time today. And then that leaves next week for us to have our final kind of capstone where we go over everything for a refresher and a review and then discuss what we're going to do in terms of testing. All right. So the content today all revolves around med, which is the elongation or the prolonging. When a vowel sound in the Quran is stretched out for a longer period of time, and that is a very distinctive thing. The Quran is distinguished from any other kind of speech or anything else in Arabic, really, primarily by the med. You do not see the med in poetry, you do not see the med in regular speech, you do not see it in any of the ahadith, for example. The med is one of the unique characteristics of the Quran. And you've all heard it before, and it's one of the things that really allows the reciter to shine through. The med of the reciter is one of the biggest indicators of their skill and their understanding of the Quran, and it's one of those things which the heart really softens to when we hear it. When we hear the med in the Quran, we feel that elation, or we feel that sincerity, or we feel that depth, whatever it is that the Qari is trying to convey to us. So what I'll do, we're kind of going to merge all three chapters into one. I'll read them all now, and then we'll go into our explanation, then come back to it and see how well we understand it. Sheikh Sulaiman al-Jamzuri writes, and I quote, أقسام المد والمد أصلي وفرعي له وسمي أولا طبيعيا وهو ما لا توقف له على سبب ولا بدونه الحروف تجتلب بل أي حرف غير همز أو سكون. And in another narration, بل أي حرف غير همز أو سكون جاء بعد مد فالطبيعي يكون والآخر الفرعي موقوف على سبب كهمز أو سكون مسجلا حروفه ثلاثة فاعيها من لفظ واي وهي في نوحيها والكسر قبل الياء وقبل الواو يضم شرط وفتح قبل ألف يلتزم واللين منها الياء وواو سكينا إن انفتاح قبل كل أعلنا. As another narration, واللين منها الياء وواو سكينا إن انفتاح قبل كل أعلنا. أحكام المد. للمد أحكام ثلاثة تدوم وهي الجواب والجواز واللزوم فواجب إن جاء همز بعد مد في كلمات وذا بمتصل يعد وجائز مد وقصر إن فصل كل بكلمات وهذا المنفصل ومثل ذا إن عرض السكون وقفا كتعلمون نستعين أو قدم الهمز على المد وذا بدل كآمن وإيمانا خذا ولازم إن السكون أصلا وصلا ووقفا بعد مد طويلا. أقسام المد اللازم. أقسام لازم لديهم أربعة وتلك كلمي وحرفي معه كلاهما مخفف مثقل فهذه أربعات تفصل فإن بكلمات سكون اجتمع مع حرف مد فهو كلمي وقع أو في ثلاثي الحروف وجدا والمد وسطه فحرفي بدا كلاهما مثقل إن أدغما مخفف كل إذا لم يدغما واللازم الحرفي أول السور وجوده وفي ثمانين حاصر يجمعها حروف كم عسل ناقص وعين ذو وجهين والطول أخص وما سوى الحرف الثلاثي لا ألف وما سوى الحرف الثلاثي لا ألف فمده مدا طبيعيا ألف وذاك أيضا في فواتح السور في لفظ حي طاهر قاد حاصر ويجمع الفواتح الأربع عشر صله سحيرا من قاطعك فاشتهر. Alright, that is all there is to know about the med. However, the translation alone is not really enough to give justice to this. So, explanation. Section 3 of our book that we've sent out talks about this. As I said, med is the lengthening of the sound to one of the letters of the med. The med rules are built upon three basic med letters, and they are the vowels of the Arabic language. Alif, when preceded with a fatha, such as the word qala. 2. Ya, second, when preceded by a kasra, such as qila. And 3. Waw, second, when preceded by a dhamma, such as yaqulu. Yaqulu. Now, one thing we need to understand is vowels in the Quran. Vowels in the Quran are very different to the vowels of the English language. With the vowels in the English language, they can all kind of make all sorts of weird things, and they'll have different sounds and a bit of irregularities and differences. The vowels in the Quran are all constant. They're all the same throughout. It's not the spelling the spelling will change, not the pronunciation. The spelling will change and the pronunciation will change with it. You'll never get the spelling of something one way, all right, a vowel written one way that makes a different sound when it's written the same way in another place. All right, for example, the E in English can make so many different sounds. The alif by itself will always make never going to change. And they come in categories. So a kasra is really nothing more than a short ya. Ya is nothing more than two kasrats. Remember how we said that shadda is just two of the same letter? For example, noon with a shadda is just two noons. Similarly, a alif is just two fathas. A kasra is just two kasras. A waw is just two dhammas, etc. And that is kind of how we understand it. And then that number, we kind of grow from there. Now, types of mad. Here is where taking notes is going to be your lifesaver. Because everything we've kind of done in terms of me encouraging you to take notes up until this point has led to this. The rules of mad, or more accurately, the types of mad, are so many. By the end of this lesson, we're going to be talking a subsection of a subsection of a subsection of a subsection of mad. So being able to track what are the sections, what are the headers, what are the subsections, etc., is going to make things so much easier on you. So this is the overall that we're going to look through: natural mad, a secondary mad, which then divides into two types: mad due to hamza, mad due to sukoon, and each divides into three types. All right. We'll go nice and slow. The first type of mad tabi'i, natural mad. You can almost kind of put this in its own thing. It's separate from the rest. A natural mad is one of the mad letters, ya, waw, or alif, not followed by a hamza or a second letter. It's prolonged to two harakas. I think before we go into these, it's important for me to clarify what is a haraka. What is a haraka? Let me turn on my camera. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay. Am I able to switch my camera somehow? No, I can't. Okay. A haraka is the time it takes you to pronounce a fatha, dhamma, or kasra. Fatha, dhamma, or kasra. A, u, e. Those are all one haraka. And we can simulate it with our fingers. Ah, ah. The time it takes to raise the finger from a fist position is the space of one haraka. For example, in a word which we're going to read with 4 harakas or 5 harakas, we will move our fingers 4. وَجَاءَ. One with 6, we would move 6 fingers. وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. So it's the time that it takes you to move a finger. Now, obviously, that's very rudimentary, that's very arbitrary. How long does it take you to move a finger? Well, how long is a piece of string? Similar concept. It depends on how fast you're reading. Always judge it by the length of your fatha, your dhamma, or your kasra, and keep it consistent. That is your one unit of measurement. If you're reading fast, for example, if you're reading fast, then your single haraka is going to be shorter. So overall, your whole thing is going to be shorter. Similarly, if you're reading slow, your whole thing is going to be longer. For example, if someone is reading غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, that's 6 because they're reading faster. However, if they're taking their time, they might say غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. It's much longer than the first one, but it still comes out to 6 harakas because it is in relation to the rest of the recitation. Your haraka is in relation to the rest of your recitation. That's how we measure it. And over time, you'll definitely get the hang of it. It's just at first you'll need to use your fingers to kind of get into the habit of understanding it, understanding how it works. All right, back to this. Back to the mad tabi'i, the natural mad. All right, mad tabi'i, if I'm going to summarize it, is just saying a letter. Alif. As I said, alif is really just 2 fathas. So it's 2 harakas. Same with waw, same with ya. U, e. So the Arabic alif, when reading the Quran, is not the same as the English A. The English A. For example, over here the word ah, just ah. In Arabic, if I'm reading a word, I will say I make it longer. I make it longer. And that's the biggest kind of takeaway I've gotten from the drop-in sessions. For many of you, unfortunately, your mad tabi'i, you translate them literally. You translate a wow to literally being a W in English. They're not really the same. They're longer. The letters of mad in Arabic in the Quran are always going to be 2 harakas. For example, the word over here, annas. Some people might mistake it and say annas, annas. That's too short. You need to give it its time to do 2 harakas, which, as we said, 2 moves of the fingers, or basically the equivalent of 2 fathas. Annas, annas. So when you stop, and then the other thing to keep in mind is that is the mad tabi'i, the natural mad when you're reading naturally. However, if you're going to stop at a word that has fathatain above the last letter, then only 1 fatha and 1 alif will be pronounced. This is what we call mad'i wab. For example, if you're reading Surah An-Nisa, most of the ayahs of Surah An-Nisa end in a sound. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. You don't say إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. No, You just pronounce that last one and you ignore the tanween at the end. For example, they've given us examples here. Shukura, musamma, right? You don't say musamman. If you're going to carry on, then you keep the tanween and you move on. Musamman wa in, for example. So tanween does not apply when you stop. Is the main thing that you need to remember. All right? Only one fatha and one alif will be pronounced. Keep in mind, no med is pronounced if the word ends in ta marbuta. I don't think anyone has done that. No one is going to make that mistake of reciting the med with ta marbuta, just because the way it's written. Ta marbuta is the little ta that looks like a ha, the ha with two dots on top. For example, rahma, rahma. It's not rahma, no, just rahma. Easy. So that's med tabi'i, that's its own thing. Now, secondary med far'i. We don't call this unnatural med, but it's not the same as natural med, but it's called far'i, meaning it's secondary. It comes as a secondary thing because this is what the Quran comes with, that differs from human speech. And med far'i can be split into two sections, as we showed before, the med due to hamza and the med due to sukoon. Now we're just focusing on the med due to hamza. That's three subsections of this subsection of this subsection. You can see where this can get confusing. The first one is med al-muttasil, the connected med. Muttasil, connected, the connected med. If a letter of med is followed by a hamza, which is present in the same word, then the reader should prolong the med to 4 or 5 harakas. This kind of med is obligatory. You can't skip it. And the med symbol in the Quran and most masahif is this one here. This little wavy line, kind of like the one on the toothpaste bottle, that is the one which indicates to you that you should say a med. It's very convenient to have, alhamdulillah. 4 or 5 harakas. For example, this word over here, I have a letter of med, alif, and on top of it I have a med symbol. Now my alif, my letter of med, is followed by a hamza, and they're in the same word. So this is med muttasil, connected med, because they're connected to each other by the same word. I'm going to recite this with 4 or 5 harakas. I want you to count on your fingers when I say this. Ja'a. Again. Ja'a. Another example with a ya this time. I have a letter of med, in this case ya, followed by a hamza, and they're in the same word. So this is med due to hamza, of course, and it is muttasil. It's connected because they're in the same word. So this e sound, I'll prolong it for 4 or 5 counts, 4 or 5 harakat. Count with me. An-nasi'u. Again. An-nasi'u. We'll try it with a waw this time. No, where's an example with waw? Here we go. Here I have a waw followed by a hamza. They're in the same word. All right, I see a med symbol as well. That's very helpful. I know that this is muttasil, it's connected, and I'm going to do 4 or 5 harakat. Count with me. Bisu'i. Bisu'i. That's it. That is your med muttasil. And this is obligatory. This is the one which you will come across the most. This is the most common one. After med tabi'i, of course. Natural med is the most common because it's just the three of the vowels. This one is the second most common. All right, the second type of secondary med, which is due to hamza, is med al-munfasil, the disconnected med. So the one we talked about above is the connected med. This is the disconnected med. If a letter of med is at the end of the word and is followed by a hamza, which is present at the beginning of the next word, then the reader should prolong the med 4 or 5 harakas. So it's the same thing as above, but basically if they're disconnected because they're in 2 separate words. The first word ends in the med letter, and the second one starts with a hamza, then they're disconnected from each other. Natural med is pronounced when stopping on a letter of mad, and this mad is optional. So, the type of mad munfasal, disconnected mad, it is optional whether you do it or you do not do it. Mad munfasil is optional. I said that the one above, the mad muttasil, it's obligatory. This one is optional. However, I must caveat, it's optional, but you need to make up your mind. So if you sit down to read Quran, let's say you're going to sit down and you say, I'm going to read Surah Yasin today. Right? I'm going to read it, let's say, for 20 minutes. During that session that you've sat down, if you decide I'm going to read the Mad Munfasil, then you need to read it every single time it shows up. You can't skip it because it's optional. You have to stick through all the way to the end. If you say you go up and you stand and you pray Salah, you pray one rak'ah, and you say, okay, in this rak'ah, I'm going to read it, I'm going to skip it because it's optional. That's completely fine as well. However, you must skip it every single time you come across it. So it's either this or that within any one sitting, or in the case of Salah, within any one rak'ah. You also get the choice whether you want to do it for 4 or 5 harakas. And again, in that case, that's up to you. Stick to it. You gotta stick to it. Now, also another thing you need to notice is because these are separate words, you are allowed to stop between 2 words to take a breath. If you are going to stop between them, so you'll stop in the middle, the first word, the one that ends in a vowel, you'll pronounce the natural mad, the mad tabi'i, for that vowel, and then you'll continue reading as normal. Okay? That is even if you decided to do this. So, for example, I have here a letter of mad, and the next word, it starts with a hamza. So that way I know that I'm going to read this munfasil. This is mad munfasil, the disconnected mad. Disconnected mad. Let's just say for the purposes of now, I'm going to read this, I'm going to read it the whole way. So I will say, إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ. Again. إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ. Over here, this alif here, this has mad tabi'i, as you heard it. Naka, 2 harakas. Now, if I decided I don't want to do mad munfasil for this setting, for this whole setting, I would say, إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ. إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ. I don't do the mad. I still do the natural mad of 2 harakas. I don't do the full way. If I'm going to pause right here because I want to take a breath, I will say, إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ بِالْحَقِّ, and keep going, keep going. But if I'm going to pause, I still need to pronounce the natural mad over here. Another example.
I have a question,
yes.
real quick, Ayman. So earlier, when we discussed the natural mad, you talked about mad Iwad, I think it was.
Yep.
Iwad. Yes. And you said that, if you stop on a word that has like, Fathatain, my bad, sorry. Never mind. My question is answered. So if you're stopping on any natural mad, you still pronounce that mad. Is that right?
I'm sorry, repeat your question.
If you're stopping on any case of the natural mad, whether it's at the end of an ayah or you're pausing for breath, you pronounce the natural mad. Is that right?
Yes.
Cool.
I think it is a bit confusing when I talk about natural mad, but all you need to know is that anytime you see a vowel, you need to pronounce the vowel as double a fatha or double a kasra or double a dhamma. Vowels need to be given their due respect and pronounced all the way through. All right, examples of mad, yes?
So you said you either do the mud or you don't. Is that in one sitting? Like consistently, is that in one sitting, or is that like just like for the rest of your life?
Oh, just in one sitting.
Oh, okay, thank you.
In one sitting, yeah. So, for example, you'll see this is a very common example of this. You will see your local sheikh or your local masjid. He will probably pray Maghrib and Isha as normal. He will read the Mad Munfasil. He's going to read it with the Munfasil. However, when it comes to Taraweeh, because he's on a time crunch, he will omit that and he's not going to read the Mad Munfasil just so he can save time. So that's an example that you can see in real life. All right. Example with another type of letter, so not alif. Over here, I have a waw, letter of mad, and it even has a mad on top of it, followed by a hamza, but that's in the second word. It's in the second word. So they're disconnected from each other. I have the choice whether I pronounce this word or I don't. I can either say وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ, or I can say وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ. Both are completely valid. If I'm going to pause in between, again, I still need to pronounce the waw properly. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ, etc. Whether, yeah, same thing. Two separate words, letter of mad followed by a hamza in the second word. في أيام, again, في أيام. That is your mad munfasil.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
So we have the option to stop instead of carrying on.
I would highly recommend against it
Okay.
in these things. But this is, for example, let's say the end of an ayah. If the end of an ayah ends with if two ayahs linked together would make a mad munfasil, for example, then if you're going to stop in the middle and take a breath because of the ayah, the end of the ayah, then yeah, you still have to pronounce the vowel as is, two harakat.
Okay, cool. Sure.
Does mad iwad apply to other than just the fathatain, like to
No.
the kasratain? No, just fathatain. Okay.
All right. Secondary mad. All right. Now, just some clarifications between mad muttasil and munfasil, in case you missed it. Mad al-muttasil is when it's present in one word, connected mad. Mad al-munfasil, the disconnected mad, is when it's present in two separate words. Mad muttasil, connected mad, is present when you're stopping on the mad and when you are joining the words. All right, let's say you're going to stop the end of the ayah. There's no such thing, but for example, the ayah ends وَالسَّمَاء. You're still going to pronounce it. Mad munfasil is only present when you're joining the words. If you're not joining the words, then you don't pronounce it. All right, number 3, mad muntasil. The connected mad is obligatory, and mad munfasil, the disconnected mad, is optional. But as I said, you need to commit to one. With mad muttasil, for one sitting, you need to commit to one or the other, whether you do it or you don't. And then the last type of mad due to hamza, the last type of far'i mad, secondary mad, which is due to hamza, is maddul badal. Maddul badal, the mad of switched letters, or the switched mad. Maddul badal, if I was to summarize it for you, is just your natural mad. But just for classification reasons, I will explain it in detail. If a letter of mad is preceded by a hamza and not followed by a hamza or a second letter, preceded means comes before, okay? Then the letter of the mad will be prolonged 2 harakas. Now, I think some of you might have realized the letter of mad, alif, waw, or ya, is already going to be pronounced with 2 harakas anyway, right? Because naturally, I'm going to pronounce it with 2 harakas. So, for example, this word over here, I have a letter of mad. Before it is a hamza. That's what makes it mad badal. That's what makes it maddul badal, the switched mad. The alif, I will always pronounce it. However, because over here the hamza is before it, we call it maddul badal, and the whole word will be pronounced wa'ata. Wa'ata. The reason we've differentiated between maddul badal and the mad tabi'i, the switched mad and the natural mad, is because in other qira'at, in other recitations of the Quran, mad al-badal will be either longer or whatnot. So in our qira'ah, for as far as you need to know, if you see a vowel, okay, by itself, with nothing on top, the vowel will be pronounced 2 harakas. A, U, E. If it has the wavy line on top, then you need to figure out what type of mad it is, and then see how long you're going to pronounce it for. Sweet. Now we move on to the second type of mad far'i, the second type of secondary mad, and that is mad due to sukoon. So the first one was the first 3, we were talking about mad due to fatha. This is mad which is due to sukoon. Sukoon basically means unvowel. a letter which doesn't have a vowel is a sakin, for example, mim sakin or noon sakin. The first type is mad al-arid lis-sukun, the mad which is exposed to sukun. If a letter of mad is followed by a letter at the end of a word, which is sakin temporarily, keyword temporarily, because the reader has to stop on the word, then the reader should prolong the mad to be mad al-arid lis-sukun. Now, sukun can either occur naturally, the letter just doesn't have a fatha, dhamma, or kasra on it. For example, like all of the examples we looked at with mim sakina. Or sukun can occur because of a pause. A pause. An example of that would be let's just say you were ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه. The ba in ريب has a fatha. I've pronounced the ba. لا ريب فيه. However, if I'm going to pause to take a breath, I would say ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى. Carry on. So I take away the fatha from the ba. Similarly, sukun here, okay? Sukun can exist because you made it exist. When you pause to take a breath, you took away the vowel, therefore you've made it a sakin. You've made it an unvoweled letter. Right? That is basically what arid al-sukun is. So if you are reading and you have a letter of if the letter of mad is followed by a letter at the end of a word, and you've made that letter sakin, that is what we call arid al-sukun. And you can do this for 2, 4, or 6 harakas. An example. Over here, the last letter of the word is sad, right? Consonant. The letter before it is a letter of mad. And if I'm going to pause over here, right, I'll say وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ, and I won't carry on. I've then taken away the dhamma from the sad because of my pause. My pause has taken away the dhamma from the sad. This now makes this mad arid lis-sukun. This alif, I can either pronounce it with 2, 4, or 6 harakas. So I can either say al-qisas, or I could say al-qisas, or I could say al-qisas. A really good example of mad arid lis-sukun would be al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I made the ya in Rahim 2 harakas. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. I made the ya of Alameen 2 harakas. Yeah. However, I can also make it 4 or 6. I can say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. 4. Or I could say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Again, same principle applies, that for mad arid al-sukun, if you're going to do 2 or 4 or 6, you need to commit from the beginning of your sitting. You're either going to do this or that or that. You can't keep switching up within the same sitting or within the same rak'ah. Examples with other letters. I have here sorry guys, the word bil ma'ruf. The fa, because of my pause, I've taken away the kasra from the fa. This wow now it's a vowel, so it used to be 2. Now I've made it arid al-sukun. It can either be 2, 4, or 6. So this word could either be bil ma'ruf, as it already was, or I could make it 4 bil ma'ruf. Or I could make it 6 bil ma'ruf. However, I would encourage that if you're still at the beginner level, just do it too. Just do the mad tabi'i. That's completely up to you. All right, and this mad only exists if the reader stops on a word. The second type of mad farai, which is due to sukun, is what we call mad al-lin. Mad al-lin. And the letters of lin, mad al-lin means the mad of soft letters. The soft letters, or the letters of lin are waw and ya. sakin. Only the waw and ya, which is sakin, preceded by a letter with a fatha. Very specific, very niche. If one of the lean letters is followed by a letter at the end of a word, which is sakin due to stopping, then again, same like above, the reader can prolong the lean to 2, 4, or 6 harakas. For example, sorry, what's it called? If one of the lean is followed by a letter. Yeah. I have here a letter of lean. Yeah. It's yeah. I know it's a letter of lean because it's either ya or waw sakin. This is sakin. And it has the letter before it has a fatha on it. So therefore, I can make this 2, 4, or 6. Khair or khair or khair. Now, what's the difference between mad al-lin and mad al-arid al-sukun? Mad al-arid al-sukun, the one above, that is for any vowel which comes before sukun. Mad al-arid al-lin is, mad al-lin is, going back, is any mad for the letter of lin. And the letters of lin, as we said, waw and ya sakin, preceded with a fatha. So that's, as we said, the letters of mad are technically the vowels when preceded by their sister. Alif preceded by fatha, ya preceded by kasra, waw preceded by dhamma. These are exceptions, waw and ya. If they are preceded with a fatha, then they count as one of the letters which we will have prolonged mad on, which is not tabiri, farai mad on. Hopefully that's not too confusing. But again, I will still put out the same encouragement. There's no mad sign on top of these. I still encourage you to read these as mad tabi'i, natural mad, and to read them for 2 harakas anytime you see them in the Quran. And then the last type of mad, the last type of secondary mad, which is on the subsection of due to sukoon, is mad al-lazim. Mad al-lazim is going to be broken up into 2 further sections, each which will be broken up into 2 further subsections. So, yeah. Be patient with me, please. Mad al-lazim means the obligatory mad, or the mad which must happen. If a letter of mad is followed by an original sukoon, not due to stopping, so as we said, a sukoon which it comes that way. The sukoon already was sukoon, it never had a vowel on it. Like, for example, noon sakina, it never had a vowel on it, regardless of where you just stop to take a breath. Or a mushaddad letter, a letter with a shadda on top, a little W sign. Then the reciter should prolong the mad to 6 harakas. You're going to read the full 6 harakas. Types of mad lazim. Mad lazim can be broken up into 2 subsections. Mad lazim kalimi, okay, the kalimi, which means of words, the mad lazim of words. And then the second type is mad lazim harfi, the mad lazim of letters. And each of those can either be muthaqqal, heavy, or mukhaffaf, light. We'll get to those in more detail. Just give us a minute. Mad lazim kalimi muthaqqal. All right. So muthaqqal is a subsection of kalimi, which is a subsection of lazim, which is the subsection of sukoon, which is a subsection of farai, secondary. You can see why this can be confusing if you don't take the time to write down notes and see how things are related to each other. If a letter of mad is followed by a mushaddad letter, which is present in the same word, then the reciter should prolong the mad to 6 harakas. All right? So for example, over here, I have a letter of mad, alif. It even has the mad symbol on top. The letter after it has a shadda. In this case, the lam has a shadda. So I know that this letter of mad, I must prolong it to 6 whole harakat, all the way. وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Again. وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Over here, this one's actually unique. This one is the only place in the Quran where you have 2 mad lazim kalimi muthaqqal in the same word. Very niche. This word is only found in Surah Al-An'am. in Surah Al-An'am when talking about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Over here, I have an alif. It's a letter of mad. It has a mad on top, followed by a jim. This jim has a shadda. So I know that this is going to be a type of mad lazim. It's going to be 6 harakas. Same thing with the waw. The waw has a mad, all right, followed by a noon with a shadda. It's also going to be 6 harakas. So altogether, this word is going to be أتحاجوني. 6 harakas for each. Right? So hopefully that clears them up. And these ones you will almost always do. What you need to know is letter of mad with the mad symbol on top of it, followed by a shadda, make them 6 harakas. Now the other subsection, mad lazim kalimi mukhaffaf, this only occurs in one word. So don't worry if you miss this rule, don't worry. And this word only occurs twice in the Quran, both of them in Surah Yunus. Both of them in Surah Yunus. If a letter of mad is followed by an original sukoon, not due to stopping, all right, which is present in the same word, then the reciter should prolong the mad 6 harakas. And this again only applies to one word, right? I have here a letter of mad, alif, followed by a letter of sukoon, natural sukoon, this lam over here. It's not sukoon because I took a breath. No, it was always going to be sukoon, regardless of what I did to it. It will always not have a vowel on it. Okay? So this word, I'm going to make this 6 harakas to say الآن. Right? Again. الآن. And even that pronunciation is contested. So I am not going to go down that rabbit hole. The second type of mad due to sukoon, the type of mad lazim. The second type of mad lazim is the mad lazim harfi. And that's the one which you guys will be a bit more familiar with. That is the type of mad lazim, the obligatory mad that occurs in letters. Letters, right? As you know, in some of the surahs of the Quran, some of the chapters of the Quran start with what we call al-huruf al-muqatta'a, the disconnected letters. And these are letters which do not form words, rather letters are pronounced independently. For example, Surah Al-Baqarah starts with Alif Lam Mim. What are these letters? What do they stand for? Are they like an acronym? What is their symbolism? What is their meaning? We don't actually know. And we're not supposed to know. Part of our iman is to show that we believe in the Quran as it is, and that there is a part of the Quran, which is these letters, these disconnected letters, whose knowledge belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knows what they mean. And on the day of Qiyamah, He will reveal to us the knowledge of these letters, what they mean. However, we will pronounce them as individual letters, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. We will not be pronouncing them. We will not be pronouncing them as part of words. We will not be pronouncing them as part of words. And there are 14 letters which occur in such a way in the Quran. So they're going to be at the beginning of surahs, like Alif Lam Mim. And they can be memorized in this mnemonic, all right, of Nassun Hakimun Qati'un Lahu Sir, which is Noon, Sad, Ayn, Ha, Kaf, Ya, Mim, Qaf, Alif, Ta, Ayn, Lam, Ha, Sin, Ra. You don't need to know that. Don't worry, you do not need to know that. When you see it in the Quran, you're going to recognize Mad Lazim Harafi. Don't worry. These letters are attached to each other like ordinary words. However, the individual letters have to be pronounced by reading out their respective names. Alif, you pronounce Alif. You don't say La, Mi. No, you say Alif, Lam, Mim, the whole name. And some of these letters are going to be prolonged by 6 harakas. Some of these letters, these disconnected letters, rather than just saying the name of it, Lam, instead we pronounce it 6 harakat, Lam. And again, those can be remembered with the mnemonic Kama asal naqas, or in this case, naqasa asalukum, same thing. And these letters here. Give me an example. All right. I have here, Bismillah, Alif Lam Mim. We've all seen this. However, the way I'm going to read it is I'm going to say literally Alif Lam Mim. This over here, if someone wants to screenshot it, go for it. If you want to know the science behind it, what you do need to know, that I want you to know, is essentially if you see the huruf al-muqatta, the disconnected letters, if it's by itself and it doesn't have a med symbol on top of it, you just say the name of it, alif. If it has the med sign on it, then you prolong it for 6 harakas. Lam mim. Right? For example, over here, ta doesn't have a med on top. I'm just going to read it as is. Ta. Sin and mim do have a ta on top, but they do have a med on top. So I'm going to read them both with 6 harakas each. As is in here. Ta sin mim. Ta sin mim. All right. And so that is, as you see, these are the letters of Kamas al Naqas. However, there are 5 letters that are only prolonged 2 harakas, and these are the letters in the phrase Hayyun Tahur, pure life, Hayyun Tahur. For example, the beginning of Surah Taha, which surprise, surprise, is the first ayah Taha. It's a ta and a ha. Neither of those have a mad on it, so you just read them as is. Taha, right? Alif is also never prolonged. So actually, this mnemonic here, it should have an alif in it, but for whatever reason, they were separated out. Now, we have med lazim harfi mukhaffaf. So the second type of med lazim harfi, the med lazim of letters, the obligatory med of letters, if a letter of med is followed by a second letter, then the reader should prolong the med 6 harakas. And really, this only applies to the ayn. Oh, sorry. Hold on. The letter of med is followed by a second letter. Yeah, sorry, yes, again, same thing. So really the only difference here is with the ayn. So for example, Qaf, in the beginning of Surah Qaf, surprise. This Qaf letter here will be pronounced with 6 harakas, as is. Because you see the med line on top of a letter, as I told you before, because Ayman told you, you're always going to read it with 6 harakas. Qaf. Over here. Alif Lam Ra. 6 harakas, right? So again, base rule. If you see a letter of the muqatta, a disconnected letter, and these will always be at the beginning of the surah, by the way. All right? If it's by itself and it doesn't have anything on top, you just read it as is. Alif. The same way you learned in the alphabet. If it has a med on top, then you pronounce it 6 harakas. Lam Mim. And then this one doesn't have anything on top, so I'm just going to say Ra. I don't say Ra. No, it's just Ra. The exception to this is the Ayn. The Ayn. Okay? Is it talked about here? No. The Ayn, all right? It can either be 4 harakas or you can make it 6 harakas. I'm going to make your life so much easier. The preferred option by most of the mashayikh, including our Sheikh al-Jazari here, have said that it is better that you do it 6 harakas. So what you need to know, by the way, Ammar, you'd asked me about this a while ago. Ayn, so all of them are 6 harakas. Ayn, it can be 4, it can be 6, but it is better that you just do it 6. It's easier to remember. But just so you can hear the difference, you can either say with 4 harakas, Ayn, Sin, Qaf. Or you could say Ayn, Sin, Qaf. However, nonetheless, Ayn as a harf muqatta only occurs in 2 places in the Quran, in Surah Ash-Shura and in Surah Maryam. So It's not really, it won't really affect you too much. So the overall rule that you need to know is when it comes to the disconnected letters, we are always going to do them 6 harakas if they have a mad symbol on them. If they don't, we just read them as is, without. Right. I will open the floor to questions in a minute, but first what we're going to do is we're going to summarize all by going back to our knob, by going back to all of this on med, and just explaining through it fast, rapid. That way, if you've missed anything, you can just fill in your gaps, and then I'll open the floor for questions. Hold on. Yeah. So, the Sheikh writes, أقسام المد, types of med. والمد أصلي وفرعي له وسمي أولا طبيعيا وهو. Med, prolongation, is either primary or secondary. Right, and the first, the primary, med طبيعي. Right, طبيعي. That's what we talked about, the natural med. Okay, it will always be 2 harakas. Now, secondary med, which is basically everything else. Sorry, just to clarify on the med طبيعي. ما لا توقف له على سبب ولا بدونه الحروف تجتلب. So it doesn't depend on any cause of prolongation. These letters cannot be brought forth. The letter is always just going to be 2 harakas. It's just the way the letter was made. It will always be a, o, e. بل أي حرف غير همز أو سكون. Right. So it's either غيري or غيره. Both are fine. بل أي حرف غير همز أو سكون جاء بعد مد فالطبيعي يكون. In fact, whichever letter besides the hamza or the unvoweled letter, which is second, appears after a letter of med, then the natural med will still result. And then we talk about our secondary med, which is everything else. والآخر الفرعي موقوف على سبب كهمز أو سكون مسجلا. And the other med, secondary med, is always dependent on a cause. So the first type of med, natural med, it's not dependent on a cause. The med will always be that way. Secondary med is dependent on a cause. For example, a hamza or a sukun. It's made a med because of a hamza which comes at some point or a sukun which comes at some point. That's what gives it the med property. Without that hamza or sukun, it would not have been med. So it doesn't come under natural. حروفه ثلاثة فاعيها من لفظ واي وهي في نوحيها. The letters of med are 3, and you can find them in the word way. Waw, alif, ya. Waw, alif, ya. Our vowels. And you can get examples out of this. He's really pushing his example here. والكسر قبل الياء وقبل الواو يضم شرط وفتح قبل ألف يلتزم. And the kasra before the letters of ya and waw, a dhamma is a requirement, and a fatha occurs before the alif is necessary. This is more of the rulings on how the mushaf should be written. So don't worry, the mushaf will be written for you. It's given to you on a silver platter. You're going to see this happen anyway. This is just an insight into the way that the mushaf is written. واللين منها الياء وواو سكينا إن انفتاح قبل كل أعلنا. And lean, as we talked about when we talked about mad al-lean, a lean letter is ya or waw. Instead of being preceded by a kasra or a dhamma, instead they are preceded with a fatha. That's why we call them lean. Alif, for it to be a letter of mad, has to be preceded by fatha anyway. It can't be preceded with dhamma. It can't be preceded by kasra. All right, the rules of med. So that was just clarifying the different types. Now we're going to talk about the rules of these. He doesn't actually give you numbers of how long you should make it. The kind of big 3 of med is 2 harakas, right? Which, as for most things, and then you have 4 or 5, which kind of come under the same umbrella. 4 or 5 are basically the same, and then the third one is 6, and that's for your like lazim. للمد أحكام ثلاثة تدوم وهي الجواب والجواز واللزوم. For mad, there are always three rules that that occur. Now, when he says rules, I don't mean sections. We were studying this in sections. These are more like the rules. Basically, what causes a mad, or what are the reasons behind mad, the origins of a mad. So don't consider this as different subsections. You've got compulsory, permissible, and necessary. Compulsory mad because the mad has to be this way. Permissible, it's permissible to do the mad this way. You also don't have to. For example, mad munfasil. And then necessary, it's necessary that you do the mad because of the situation you've been put in. Because you've taken a breath in a certain way, it was necessary that you do mad here in a certain way. فواجب إن جاء همز بعد مد في كلمة وذا بمتصل واد. You must do a hamza. You must do mad when a hamza comes after the letter of mad. Alif waw ya, in the same word, and this is what we call muttasil, connected mad. As we said, the connected mad, the mad muttasil, is when you have a letter of mad followed by a hamza in the same word. It's going to be 4 or 5 harakats. You must do it. وجائز مد وقصر إن فصل كل بكلمة وهذا المنفصل. And this is talking about the mad al-munfasil, the disconnected mad. All right, it is permissible whether you shorten it or you elongate it when they are in separate words. Munfasil is the two mads, the letter of mad and the hamza are in two separate words. You can disconnect them from each other. ومثل ذا إن عرض السكون وقفا كتعلمون نستعين. And the same concept of optional mad, which we talked about with munfasil, is when we're doing mad عارض للسكون, mad exposed to sukun. So that is when you have a temporary sukun due to a stop. For example, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, because we've stopped, it's no longer Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim Maliki. So that way, the vowel, which is the second to last letter of the word, can either be prolonged to 2 or 4/5 or 6 harakats. It could be Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, or it could be Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, or it could be Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, 2, 4, or 6. All right. And then he gave you he gave 2 examples in here, ta'lamun and nasta'in. You've got a vowel followed by the last letter, and because if you're stopping, you've taken away the vowel. That's what makes a mad عارض للسكون, mad exposed to sukun. أو قدم الهمز على المد وذا بدل كآمنوا وإيمانا خذا. And then again, if it's switched around, that the hamza comes before the letter of mad, then we call it badal, substitute, or switched mad, such as the words amanu or iman. Now again, as I said, in the qira'ah of Hafs and Asim, in the recitation that we recite, just to make things easier for you, this is the same as mad tabi'i. Okay, if you see an alif or a waw or a ya, if it has no mad symbol on it, it's going to be 2 harakas. All right, this is just telling you if it has a hamza before it, it becomes mad badal, mad of switched letters. ولازم إن السكون أصلا وصلا ووقفا بعد مد طولا. And mad lazim is going to be, you must do it, right, if the sukun is permanent during waqf and wasl, meaning if the sukun is a natural sukun, the letter is naturally unvoweled, it hasn't lost its vowel because you stopped. No, the letter comes unvoweled, all right, then you must make mad, and that is 6 harakat. For example, وَلَضَّالِّينَ, 6 harakat. All right. Then we have our final chapter before the conclusion chapter. أقسام المد اللازم, the types of mad lazim. أقسام لازم لديهم 4 وتلك كلمي وحرفي معه. The types of lazim, so the types of mad lazim are 4. there are 4 types of mad lazim, and they can either be kilmi or harfi, meaning they can either be wordle, mad lazim of words, or a mad lazim of letters. We talked about that extensively. So if it comes in a word, like naturally in a word, then it becomes kalimi. If it's out of a letter, the huruf muqatta at the beginning of a surah, then it becomes of a letter, mad lazim of a letter. And each of those 2 can be broken into mukhaffaf or muthaqqal, heavy or light. كلاهما مخفف مثقل فهذه أربعة تفصل. Both of them, mad lazim kalimi and mad lazim harfi, can either be mukhaffaf or muthaqqal, meaning they can either be heavy or light. And he's going to explain the next 4, these 4 subcategories in detail. في إن بكلمة سكون اجتمع مع حرف مد فهو كلمي وقع. So if in a single word, we're talking about words here, not letters, words, a sukoon meets with a letter of mad, then it is kilmi. Right? That's like the example we gave just above, a sukoon which comes, all right, and before that sukoon you have a letter of mad, and that letter of mad has to be elongated to 6. أو في ثلاثي الحروف وجدا والمد وسطه فحرفي بدا. All right. Or if it is found in the triliteral letters, while the letter of mad is in its center, then the harfi has appeared. This is a little bit advanced. As I said, if you see a disconnected letter, for example, alif lam mim, if it has the mad symbol on top, just give it 6 harakat. كلاهما مثقل إن أدغما مخفف كل إذا لم يدغما. Both of these, kilmi and harfi, are going to be heavy when idgham takes place, and they're going to be light when there is no idgham taking place. Now, I've intentionally not talked about idgham and mad because I do not want to throw you off even more. And I did say that we're not doing anything about idgham moving on. After last lesson was the last thing on idgham. Again, same thing proceeds, same thing happens. If you see disconnected letters, if it has a mad symbol on top, 6 harakas. If it doesn't, you don't do any kind of mad. You just read the letter as is. واللازم الحرفي أول السور وجوده وفي 8 انحصر. And the mad lazim harfi is found at the beginning of the Quranic chapters, and is confirmed in 8 letters. And as we said, that's the letters which come at the beginning of surahs like alif lam mim, taha, yasin, qaf, sad, etc. All right, and they come, they're known in 8 letters. يجمعها حروفك مع سل نقص. You can know these 8 letters by the phrase كم عسل نقص. كم عسل نقص, which translates to how much honey has diminished. Meaning, like, let's say you have a jar of honey and you ask someone how much honey has been taken out of the jar. How much has the jar gone down in honey? Irrelevant. And then he says وعين ذو وجهين والطول أخص. And in another relation والعين ذو وجهين والطول أخص. The letter عين has 2 options. As we said, ayn can either be 4 harakas or it can be 6 harakas. However, it is preferred that you do 6 harakas. Preferred you do it all the way. وما سوى الحروف حرف الثلاثي لا ألف فمده مدا طبيعيا ألف. Right. And this is just talking about the natural mad. All besides the triliteral letters, which is waw, alif, and ya, except alif. So he could have just said waw and ya, but it's to make it rhyme. Then the mad is known as a natural mad. وذاك أيضا في فواتح الصور في لفظ حي طاهر قد انحصر. And those letters are also in the beginning of the chapters of the Quran. And these are the letters which we're basically talking about, the letters which they're part of the disconnected letters, part of the huruf muqatta'a, but they do not have a mad on them. So like taha or the alif in alif lam mim. And you can find them all in the phrase hayyin tahir. Hayyin tahir. Ha, ya, ta, alif, ha, ra. You don't need to memorize this. And hayyin tahir means like a pure life or a clean life. ويجمع الفواتح الأربع عشر صله صحيرا من قطعك فاشتهر. And again, he gathers the 14 letters that will so the 14 letters that make up the 8 letters of the disconnected letters, you don't need to know this, by the way, just a cool little thing, is the expression سله صحيرا من قطعك فاشتهر, which means in the morning the one who cuts ties with you is as it is well known. For example, which basically means like the person who betrays you, right? As a qari, as a person who is close to the Quran, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all the people of the Quran. He's kind of giving you a piece of advice. You're going to know the person who betrays you, and there are people who will backstab you. You're going to recognize them throughout your life if you are a person of the Quran. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all of those people. Okay, that is the rules of med. I've gone and intentionally talked about med from the book primarily because I think it lays it out in a slightly more clear manner for the English speaker. And I think it's better that if you're going to revise over these notes or you're trying to re-understand something, you come back to this rather than going back to the source and looking at the poem. So now we open the doors. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry for going over time.
Assalamu alaikum. I do have a question.
Yes.
Is there a rule like mad ibad when you stop on a word that has either kasratain or lammatain?
No.
All right. What if there is a word ends with kasratain or lammatain at the end? How should we stop there?
Oh, sorry. No, I misunderstood your question. Yes. And Mazen, you asked the same question, didn't you? Yes. So, okay. Again, tanween, as we said, tanween at the end of an ayah or at the end of a stop, you don't pronounce the tanween. You just you ignore the tanween at all. That's your general rule, and that means for mad iwad, again, the same thing happens. You don't pronounce the tanween. All it means is, like, let's say it's a ya, you won't pronounce it tabi'i. You won't pronounce the ya. Sorry, you won't do a med on that ya. You won't do a long med on that ya. So, for example, if the word ends with alif, وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ الرَّحْمَنُ وَلَدًا. In some situations, you can read that longer, the alif at the end there, all right, and you take away the tanween. However, if it was a kasra, for example, no, not wadduha. I don't think this is an example, actually. Yeah. So this rule in itself has kind of shot itself in the foot. That's why it's not included, by the way, in the rules of med. I don't need anyone to memorize med iwab because it's largely theoretical. Because you're going to read it that way anyway. Because all the other rules that we've talked about, they already cover mad iwab anyway. It's unnecessary to add an extra step of work or an extra step of clarification if you already know the answer via other means. Other questions? From the brothers? All right, sweet. Jazakumullah khairan. Apologies if we went over time. We will have drop-in sessions, inshallah. We will be practicing our meds, inshallah. I will be releasing those times out soon. Please try and attend them. Inshallah, next week will be our final week of actual classes, a Thursday class, 8:30 p.m. And then from there, I'll be explaining the rules of our test and how that's going to look like, and then subsequent graduation from this course. So جزاكم الله خيرا. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت.